good morning. For today's story, I'm going to read The Tale of Jemima Puddle-duck by Beatrix Potter. Now open your eyes and turn on your ears, and here we go. What a funny sight it is to see a brood of ducklings with a hen. Listen to the story of Jemima Puddle-duck, who was annoyed because the farmer's wife would not let her hatch her own eggs. Her sister-in-law, Mrs. Rebecca Puddle-duck, was perfectly willing to leave the hatching to someone else. So there's Jemima and her puddle-duck friends, and then there's the chicken with her chicks. I have not the patience to sit on a nest for 28 days, and no more have you, Jemima. You would let them go cold, you know you would. I wish to hatch them all by myself, quacked Jemima Puddle-duck. She tried to hide her eggs, but they were always found and carried off. Jemima Puddle-duck became quite desperate. She determined to make a nest right away from the farm. So there she is talking to her friends about it. She set off on a fine spring afternoon along the cart road that leads over the hill. She was wearing a shawl and a poke bonnet. When she reached the top of the hill, she saw a wood in the distance. She thought that it looked a safe, quiet spot. Jemima Puddle-duck was not much in the habit of flying. She ran downhill a few yards, flapping her shawl, and then she jumped off into the air. She flew beautifully when she had a good start. She skimmed along over the treetops until she saw an open place in the middle of the wood, where the trees and brushwood had been cleared. Jemima alighted rather heavily and began to waddle about in search of a convenient dry nesting place. She rather fancied a tree stump amongst some tall foxgloves. But seated upon the stump, she was startled to find an elegantly dressed gentleman reading a newspaper. He had black prick ears and sandy-colored whiskers. "Quack," said Jemima Puddle-duck, with her head and her bonnet on one side. "Quack." The gentleman raised his eyes above his newspaper and looked curiously at Jemima. "Madam, have you lost your way?" said he. He had a long, bushy tail which he was sitting upon, as the stump was somewhat damp. Jemima thought him mighty civil and handsome. She explained that she had not lost her way, but that she was trying to find a convenient dry nesting place. "Ah, is that so? Indeed," said the gentleman with sandy whiskers, looking curiously at Jemima. He folded up the newspaper and put it in his coat tail pocket. Jemima complained of the superfluous hen. "Indeed, how interesting. I wish I could meet with that fowl. I would teach it to mind its own business. But as to a nest, there is no difficulty. I have a sack full of feathers in my woodshed. No, my dear madam, you will be in nobody's way. You may sit there as long as you like," said the bushy, long-tailed gentleman. He led the way to a very retired, dismal-looking house amongst the foxgloves. It was built of faggots and turf, and there were two broken pails, one on top of another, by way of a chimney. "This is my summer residence. You would not find my earth, my winter house, so convenient," said the hospitable gentleman. There was a tumble-down shed at the back of the house made of old soap boxes. The gentleman opened the door and showed Jemima in. The shed was almost quite full of feathers. It was almost suffocating, but it was comfortable and very soft. Jemima Puddle-duck was rather surprised to find such a vast quantity of feathers, but it was very comfortable, and she made a nest without any trouble at all. When she came out, the sandy-whiskered gentleman was sitting on a log reading the newspaper. At least he had it spread out, but he was looking over the top of it. He was so polite that he seemed almost sorry to let Jemima go home for the night. He promised to take great care of her nest until she came back again the next day. He said he loved eggs and ducklings. He should be proud to see a fine nestful in his woodshed. Jemima Puddle-duck came every afternoon. She laid 9 eggs in the nest. The foxy gentleman admired them immensely. At last, Jemima told him that she intended to begin to sit next day. "And I will bring a bag of corn with me so that I need never leave my nest until the eggs are hatched. They might catch cold," said the conscientious Jemima. "Madam, I beg you not to trouble yourself with the bag. I will provide oats. But before you commence your tedious sitting, I intend to give you a treat. Let us have a dinner party, all to ourselves." "May I ask you to bring up some herbs from the farm garden to make a savory omelet? Sage and thyme and mint and 2 onions and some parsley. I will provide lard for the omelet," said the hospitable gentleman with sandy whiskers. Jemima Puddle-duck was a simpleton. Not even the mention of sage and onions made her suspicious. She went round the farm garden, nibbling off snippets of all the different sorts of herbs that are used for stuffing roast duck. And she waddled into the kitchen and got 2 onions out of a basket. The collie dog Kep met her coming out. "What are you doing with those onions? Where do you go every afternoon by yourself, Jemima Puddle-duck?" Jemima was rather in awe of the collie. She told him the whole story. The collie listened with his wise head on one side. He grinned when she described the polite gentleman with sandy whiskers. He asked several questions about the wood and about the exact position of the house and shed. Then he left and trotted down to the village. He went to look for 2 foxhound puppies who were walking with the butcher. Jemima Puddle-duck went up to the cart road for the last time on a sunny afternoon. She was rather burdened with bunches of herbs and 2 onions in a bag. She flew over the wood and alighted opposite the house of the bushy, long-tailed gentleman. He was sitting on a log. He sniffed the air and kept glancing uneasily around the wood. When Jemima alighted, he quite jumped. "Come into the house as soon as you have looked at your eggs. Give me the herbs for the omelet. Be quick." He was rather abrupt. Jemima Puddle-duck had never heard him speak like that. She felt surprised and uncomfortable. While she was inside, she heard pattering feet round the back of the shed. Someone with a black nose sniffed at the bottom of the door and then locked it. Jemima became much alarmed. A moment afterwards, there were most awful noises: barking, baying, growls and howls, squealing and groans. And nothing more was ever seen of that foxy whiskered gentleman. Presently, Kep opened the door of the shed and let out Jemima Puddle-duck. Unfortunately, the puppies rushed in and gobbled up all the eggs before he could stop them. He had a bite on his ear, and both the puppies were limping. Jemima Puddle-duck was escorted home in tears on account of those eggs. She laid some more in June, and she was permitted to keep them herself, but only 4 of them hatched. Jemima Puddle-duck said that it was because of her nerves, but she had always been a bad sitter. The end. So that's the tale of Jemima Puddle-duck by Beatrix Potter. Now let's go inside and do some art. Okay, so for today's art, we're going to do our own Jemima Puddle-duck. So you should have a cutout of a duck, and then I also included some feathers and some googly eyes. And the way we're going to paint our Jemima Puddle-duck today is we're going to use our fingers. So I've got some white paint. I'm just going to pour some out. And then I'm going to use 1, 2, 3 fingers, and I'm going to paint my duck. And remember, it's okay to get messy. It's okay to get paint on your hands because you're doing art. Okay, now you noticed I've left her feet and her beak unpainted with my 3-finger paint because I'm going to go back in later and do her legs with either a yellow crayon or a yellow marker just to give her some detail. Now let me wipe off my fingers because I need to reach into my bag and get my feathers and my eyes. Okay, so ducks have feathers, and so I could probably just stick it on since the paint's wet and not use glue. So I'm going to give her a feather here. That's 1 feather. I think I'll give her a feather down here. That's 2 feathers, and maybe 1 big fluffy feather right here. So 1, 2, 3 feathers, and then I think she's looking to the side, so I'm only going to stick on 1 googly eye. And that might pop off when the paint dries, but I can just use some glue to glue that on. And then we'll do the feet and the beak. But I'm going to set this aside for a second because I want to show you my Peter Rabbit. So remember we used a cotton ball to paint our Peter Rabbit to make him look like he has fluffy fur. And then we had blue tissue paper to make his little blue coat. And then I just trimmed it off from the back and I added some details. I gave him his eyes, his nose, and some whiskers. Oh, and 2 little shoes. I think he looks pretty cute. So we're gonna let this dry and then I'll come back and we'll do the detail in just a little bit. So for today's science, it's actually kind of science gardening. We're going to have a potato grow a vine. And I'm gonna show you how to do that. I actually have a potato that I've already cut in half. And as you can see, it got buried in the back of my pantry, and when I found it, it's already sprouting. So it's ready to plant, not to eat. So I have a jar of water, and I have my potato, and then I have some toothpicks that I'm going to stick in it so it doesn't completely fall in the water. And we will have to change the water out like every 1 to 2 days, just keep an eye on it. But what it's going to do is it's going to start forming roots, and the roots will grow down into the water and they'll be down below. And then the vine will start growing out from this part that we call eyes. Okay, so here's my jar of water. Here's my potato that I cut. And I'm gonna push him into the jar so that he is in the water. I don't know why it's a he, but it's a he. And we're going to stick him in there, and then just in case so he doesn't completely fall in, I'm going to just use some toothpicks to give him kind of a kickstand or some arms and legs to keep him out of the water. So we will keep an eye on it, and we'll keep coming back to it and see the progress of of roots, and hopefully vines. That's it for our gardening science. And then now let's get back to Jemima Puddle-duck. So she's been drying, and here's a picture of our Jemima Puddle-duck. And see how you can only see 1 eye because she's standing to the side? That's why I only gave her 1 eye, is because her head is turned, and so you can only see 1 eye if my face was turned. So there she is, and I have my markers. And here's my orange marker. So I'm going to color 1 leg orange, And here's her second leg, or number 2 leg, because ducks have 2 legs and 2 feet. And then I'm going to color her beak. And she has 1 beak. And then see if I can pick her up. She's still a teensy bit wet. But there she is, Jemima Puddle-duck. Hope you enjoyed today's story, art, and science, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.